everywhere podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I hope you are enjoying today's show because we are in the home stretch of it. We have yet another player profile of a quarterback who is much more experienced than Anthony Richardson, but is also more in that steady player mold. Definitely someone who you don't necessarily appreciate in fantasy. I do. This seems like a show where almost every single player at some point or another I've had on my fantasy team last year. This guy's no different. He definitely was one of my better QBs that I rostered in my team last year, and that, of course, is Jared Goff. In fact, I will go so far as to say if it weren't for CJ Stroud, Jared Goff would definitely have been my QB1 on my fantasy team. So kudos to Jared Goff. I will give him the nod if so few others will not. Let's go to our one-person graphic overlay, shall we, and give him his due respect. Now, Jared Goff, like I said, he certainly is someone who does not get the appreciation he deserves in fantasy. However, even as a Ram, where he garnered his most criticism, he still had some fantastic seasons. And love him or hate him, he fits into systems well, he understands the game well, and he understands his limitations, most importantly, very well. And that's what kind of separates him from, say, other QBs stuck in the middle of the fantasy realm. And so, without further ado, let's just jump right into what makes Jared Goff so special. Throughout his career, he's garnered 1,873.2 fantasy points. His best season was actually as an LA Ram in 2018 with 310.32 fantasy points. Last year, though, was a close second as his best season as a Detroit Lion. So, no matter what jersey he wears, Jared Goff will always be a presence in fantasy. Last year, to prove it, he was a QB7 in fantasy scoring. However, only the QB13 in fantasy points per game. Another huge star was that he was a QB5 who made over 6.5 starts. So any quarterback who made 6 over that starts was in that statistic, and he was QB6 there. I really, really think that Jared Goff is a special quarterback. To go along with that, similar stats to a guy like Matthew Stafford, who we talked about earlier in the week, with 205.1 pass yards and 1.7 TD passing averages per game. And the fantasy odds love him as well. They're projecting him to have 4,092 yards next year, 27 touchdowns, 10 interceptions for a total of 268.8 fantasy points. Now, a lot of you are skeptical, I know, of Jared Goff's style of play because it's not the most attractive, it's not the most sexy, it's not the most pretty. It's definitely designed to get the most out of what he has. It's definitely designed to mask his limitations. And so, some kind of disconnect has arisen between fantasy players and Jared Goff, but here's why I think that those notions need to be dropped. Jared Goff, in that kind of period where the Rams and Lions were doing business together, and Jared Goff ended up a Detroit Lion, Jared Goff got the short end of the stick there. Matthew Stafford was like, oh, he's definitely going to change the face of the Rams. He's going to lead them to the Super Bowl. This team changes. With Jared Goff moving the other way, it certainly felt like, what's he going to be for the Detroit Lions? What's the culture and identity of the Detroit Lions going to be with a guy like Jared Goff? Because everyone thought the problem was Jared Goff and maybe not Sean McVay, because Sean McVay was this offensive guru. And while there were flashes of what Jared Goff could be, he did reach a Super Bowl, and he had some historically fantastic games. There certainly was not enough there for people to convince that moving to another team would help him even further. And yet, he's developed notions one by one as he's helped the Lions become a true contender in the NFC, almost leading them to the promised land of the Super Bowl for the first time in their history last year. But head coaching in that situation definitely hurt Lions. But the fact that Jared Goff helped the team more than he hurt them is what stands out to me. Because I don't necessarily think that the whole disconnect between fantasy players and Jared Goff stems from his play itself. I think it stems from his aura. I think that the expectations for him in LA under an offensive-minded coach like Sean McVay were a little bit too high. Obviously, the pressure of being a number one overall pick certainly did not help either. And so, I think that Jared Goff just needed to find a place for himself where he fit the mold. Because Jared Goff is not necessarily everyone's favorite quarterback, but he certainly is everyone's most serviceable quarterback at the QB position. He's going to do wrong, he's going to take care of the football, and in quiet ways, he's going to find a way to produce nice yards for you. And so, that's why Jared Goff, to me, at the very least, is someone you can never undervalue in fantasy, because he's going to be there in the drafts. A lot of people are going to see premium guys, but Jared Goff's going to be there for a little bit, and you don't want to pass him over. Here's one caveat I can think of, and that, in fact, Dan Campbell. I didn't necessarily think that Dan Campbell would be a problem because he's proven that his culture fits the Lions. It's physical and enough. At the end of the day, it's very telling when your biggest problem becomes not sticking with a game plan in certain games. And what we saw in the NFC Championship game was that the running game really worked. I mean, the passing game did stay on schedule, but certainly was not explosive enough to maintain against the San Francisco 49ers. So a big question at that game, why did the Lions run the football a bit more? And so that kind of falls in Dan Campbell's wheelhouse. Dan Campbell is going to have to figure out a way so that Jared Goff can be his usual steady self, while also acknowledging the fact that at certain times, Lions offense is going to have to rely on different ways of moving the football. And Jared Goff is certainly good at diagnosing that. He knows the tempos and variants of this Lions offense. He's not necessarily going to be someone who completely overlooks what is working, because he also knows that his limitations can be masked, and if he's not playing well, then someone definitely has to. So Jared Goff, that's another thing about him, adjust tempo of the game. But say that Dan Campbell and the Lions are in late game situations and they're kind of pushing themselves. That's what worries me. I think that in order for the Lions to spell the notions, it's all going to rely on Jared Goff. I think Jared Goff's decision making is one of those traits where he's definitely fantastic at times, but sometimes he loses that. And late in the games, I actually think that in order for D1 to overcome all that, I actually believe that once you look at finding ways to make sure the structure of your system, everyone who's doing in those late situations, you're on. And that's my question. Jared might always be on. And I don't necessarily see a path where it's going to be a huge turn. That is one of those small fractional caveats that I worry about Jared Goff. If only about Jared Goff, like say the words need, then by all means, draft him and rest assured that he will always perform for you. But I'm still worried about some things where his decision making might be called into question, then, by all means, shy away from him. But he's definitely going to be someone who's always reliable, and at the end of the day, that's all you can ask for from a quarterback. But coming up next on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast for our next segment, we're switching over to a very interesting tight end who's also in the mold of a guy who is on the up-and-coming rise in the tight end revolution. I don't think you guys want to miss this segment because this guy certainly is a diamond in the rough. We'll be right back on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast to close out the show with him.